The county auction room smelled of dust and disappointment. Jackson Foster sat in the back row, his German Shepherd service dog, Sentinel, pressed against his leg. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in the same sickly pallor. Jackson's fingers traced the edges of his discharge papers. 6 months since Afghanistan, 3 months since his wife handed him divorce papers along with his share of their debt. Parcel 1741 Harmon Estate, the auctioneer announced. Stone residence, built 1974, abandoned. Minimum bid 50 cents. A murmur rippled through the room. No hands went up. Opening bid 50 cents, the auctioneer repeated. Jackson's hand rose almost involuntarily. Sentinel shifted against his boot, amber eyes watching the movement. Sold. The gavel came down with finality that seemed excessive for a 50-cent transaction. At the clerk's desk, the paperwork transformed his impulsive bid into $3.27 with fees and taxes. The woman behind the counter slid a brass key across to him, taped to a manila envelope. "You can still walk away," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As he reached the door, she called after him, sliding a worn 50-cent piece toward him. "For luck," she murmured, eyes holding his for a beat too long. The drive to the property took 40 minutes, the road climbing into foothills where bare trees stood like sentinels against the January sky. The house appeared suddenly, a wide stone structure set back from the road. Gray limestone blocks stacked in irregular patterns, speaking of both strength and neglect. Jackson killed the engine and listened. No birds, no distant traffic, just wind sifting through dead grass. The lock turned smoothly, too smoothly for a house supposedly abandoned for decades. The door swung inward on silent hinges, releasing air that smelled stale but dry. The foyer opened to a curving staircase. Dust filmed the banister, but the wood underneath showed a subtle sheen, as if touched more recently than the county records indicated. Sentinel moved ahead, nose close to the floor, then doubled back, tail held stiff, ears angled forward. The kitchen held avocado-colored appliances and laminate countertops, a time capsule from the 70s. Jackson opened a cabinet to find a single mug with a hairline crack. The refrigerator stood unplugged, a calendar stuck to its surface with a fishing-themed magnet. 2009. Too recent for a house supposedly abandoned since the 80s. Jackson unrolled his sleeping bag in the living room, set out water for Sentinel, and opened a can of beans for himself. They ate in silence, the air carrying faint echoes from the stone walls. Later, he stepped outside again. A pickup rolled past on the gravel road, slowing briefly. The driver made no acknowledgement, neither friendly nor hostile. Neutrality, Jackson thought. In towns like this, neutrality was safer than welcome. As darkness fell, Jackson returned inside. The house offered its first unprompted sound, a creak from overhead, too deliberate to be settling wood. Sentinel's head lifted, ears pricked. Jackson stood motionless, one hand resting on the dog's back. The silence resettled, heavier than before. Before turning off his flashlight, he placed the 50-cent piece on the stone hearth. It caught the weak beam, a dull silver circle against slate. "We'll make this count," he whispered. Sentinel blinked, gaze steady and calm. Night pressed against the stone house with a weight Jackson hadn't felt since Afghanistan. He woke to Sentinel pacing in tight circles, the dog's movements agitated in a way Jackson recognized from combat patrols. When Jackson didn't immediately follow, Sentinel barked once, a sharp sound that reverberated against the thick walls, multiplying like enemy fire. Jackson rose, grabbing his flashlight. Sentinel led him down the hallway, stopping at a section of plastered wall where nothing should be. The dog's claws scraped against the surface, digging furiously. Flakes of pale paint fell away, exposing an uneven seam beneath. Jackson crouched, running his fingers over the jagged line. The mortar was different here, smoother, newer. Behind it, a hollow echo suggested space where there should be none. "Something's here," he whispered. He returned to his truck, for tools. For hours, Jackson worked at the patched surface, chipping away with the patience of a man who'd learned that rushing only gets people killed. Sentinel waited nearby but never relaxed, circling behind him, pausing often to stare down the dark hallway as if expecting company. The plaster finally gave way until a section shifted inward with a muffled thud. Behind it lay a narrow doorway, hidden beneath amateur repairs. Jackson pushed his flashlight through first, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. Sentinel went ahead without hesitation, tail held high, every muscle visibly tense. At the bottom, Jackson's beam revealed a chamber carved into the earth. Not a cellar for storage, but a room designed for secrecy. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls, their labels handwritten in neat cursive. Cardboard boxes were stacked in precise rows, dust lying thick but undisturbed. In the center stood a desk with a single lamp, its cord unplugged but the bulb intact, as if someone expected to return at any moment. These weren't family mementos or household storage. These were records, methodically organized, deliberately hidden. He opened a drawer, land deeds spilled forth, stamped with official county seals. Names of local families appeared in neat columns, accompanied by dates of transfer and sale. Some documents bore signatures that looked suspiciously similar. The ink faded, but the strokes nearly identical. Jackson sifted quickly through the papers until a photograph slipped free from between two folders. He held it up to the beam, and the world shifted beneath him. His father, younger, standing straight in a suit jacket, beside a German shepherd in a uniform harness. The image mirrored his own partnership with Sentinel with eerie precision. Sentinel leaned against his leg, nose pressing against the photograph as if recognizing a predecessor. Jackson turned the photo over. Written faintly in pencil. Petition, 1979, land case. His father had been part of something decades before Jackson was born. Something hidden beneath plaster and silence. He searched further, finding a folder bound with faded string. Inside lay affidavits from residents accusing the mayor's office of double-selling properties, pushing families off their land with falsified notices, manipulating county records. Among them, a letter addressed but never sent in his father's handwriting. If I cannot stand in court, let my son know the truth. The air in the hidden room thickened. Jackson sat heavily on the edge of the desk, photograph in one hand, letter in the other. He felt an old ache bloom in his chest, the pain not from war, but from absence. The absence of a father who died when Jackson was 12, leaving behind questions never answered. The official story, car accident on a rainy night, tragic but simple. But Jackson had always sensed the gaps in the narrative, the way conversation would stop when he entered rooms, the strange looks from townspeople at the funeral. Sentinel rose suddenly, hackles raised, gaze fixed on the stairs they had descended. The dog gave a short bark, not frantic but sharp, the sound of alert without panic. Jackson clicked off his flashlight. Darkness swallowed them whole. He listened, heart pounding in his ears. The house above groaned once, as if bearing weight. Sentinel pressed closer, the warmth of his body steady against Jackson's knee. For hours, Jackson sat at the desk below, the letter and photograph tucked safely into his jacket pocket. He had not turned the flashlight back on, preferring the protection of darkness. Sentinel remained close, though occasionally the shepherd's ears twitched toward the stairs. When he finally rose, gathering a handful of the most damning documents, the floorboards above gave a faint groan. Not the familiar creak of old wood settling, but a sharper noise, the sound of weight shifting deliberately across beams. Jackson froze, listening with the discipline earned through combat deployments. Sentinel stood beside him, head angled upward, silent but alert, muscles coiled tight as tripwire. Jackson whispered easy, though his own voice felt taut as a bowstring. The sound came again, a subtle scrape followed by a deliberate stillness. Someone trying not to be heard, failing. He moved through the darkness, Sentinel pacing beside him, and reached the base of the hidden stairwell. Each step was carefully placed, avoiding the boards that had protested on their descent. But Sentinel turned not toward the main living area but upward, toward a narrow pull-down ladder that led to the attic. The dog's nose pointed toward the ceiling hatch, his posture rigid with certainty. Jackson directed his flashlight beam upward. A faint line of disturbed dust circled the edges of the square opening. Jackson climbed slowly, the flashlight tucked against his chest. He pushed the panel open, letting stale air pour down as he pulled himself into the attic space. The space was low and broad, rafters exposed like the ribs of some ancient beast. A thin mattress pad lay crumpled against one wall, and beside it, a scattering of cigarette butts. Jackson crouched, touching one. It was cold now, but not ancient. Days old, not years. Not. The beam of light landed on fabric draped over a beam. He pulled it free, recognition immediate. A heavy wool jacket, the kind worn by men of authority in small towns. Inside the collar, stitched initials confirmed what Jackson already suspected. V.S. Mayor Victor Sullivan. The house was not abandoned. It had been occupied by the eyes and ears of the most powerful family in the county. Jackson held the fabric, rough against his palms, and stood perfectly still as realization settled like sediment. Sentinel whined softly below, impatient. Jackson lowered the jacket for the dog to smell. Sentinel's nose pressed against it, nostrils flaring as he cataloged the scent. Then the shepherd growled low, a sound deeper than warning. It was recognition and hatred. Jackson folded the jacket under his arm and swept the flashlight across the attic once more. Beside the mattress pad sat an empty thermos and a pack of matches from the diner off Main Street. Every item told the same story. Sullivan had been using this house as a personal observation post. Back in the living room, Jackson laid the jacket across the hearth, staring at it as Sentinel circled once, then settled against his boots. The dog's gaze never left the fabric, as if it might animate at any moment. Jackson woke to pale winter sunlight filtering through dusty windows. Sentinel was already awake, standing at the front window, body rigid with alertness. His mind churned through implications as he made instant coffee. If Sullivan had been using this house, watching it, what did he fear someone might find? The documents in the hidden basement pointed to decades of corruption. Land seized through fraudulent means, properties double-sold, families pushed out through bureaucratic manipulation. And his father had known, had been investigating, had hidden evidence here, perhaps intending to build a case. Then died in an accident that, in light of these discoveries, suddenly seemed far less accidental. Sentinel's bark jerked Jackson from his thoughts. A utility company truck stopped near the mailbox. A worker approached the electrical meter on the side of the house. "Morning," the worker offered, eyes flickering to the dog. "County sent me to check your connection. Records show this place has been off-grid a while." Not true, Jackson thought. The house had power when he arrived. Someone had called this in. After a cursory inspection, the worker returned with his verdict. "Lines look compromised. Wouldn't be safe to connect without a full inspection. I'll need to file a report, get approval. Could take weeks." A lie transparent as glass. The message clear. "We can make your life difficult." After the truck departed, Jackson walked the perimeter himself. The power lines to the house appeared perfectly intact. This was the first move in what would clearly become a campaign of obstruction. The name came easily. Marcus Reynolds, former sheriff of Westfall County, retired a decade earlier. If anyone knew what had happened to his father, it would be Reynolds. Jackson remembered him from the funeral, a tall man with sad eyes who had gripped his shoulder too tightly and said nothing. Reynolds still lived on the edge of town in a modest ranch house surrounded by the rusting skeletons of farm equipment. The old Ford truck parked in the drive had more rust than paint, but the yard was neatly kept. Jackson loaded the most critical documents into his truck, set the mayor's jacket on top, and tapped the passenger seat for Sentinel. When they pulled into Reynolds' driveway, the old man was already on the porch, coffee mug in hand, a flannel shirt buttoned to his throat despite the warming day. "Foster's boy?" he called as Jackson climbed from the truck. Jackson nodded. "This is Sentinel." Reynolds studied the shepherd with narrowed eyes as if measuring him against some remembered standard. Then the old man sighed and pushed open the screen door. Inside, the house smelled of old paper and cedar. Framed photographs lined the walls, Reynolds in uniform at various ages, shaking hands with governors, standing beside fellow officers. Jackson placed the folder on the table, lifted the jacket, and pushed it toward the former sheriff. Reynolds' jaw tightened, recognition immediate. "So you found it," he said, voice flat. "The house." Reynolds' fingers traced the edge of a deed, eyes scanning dates and signatures. "Your father was looking into this. Land transfers, tax manipulations. Sullivan's family has been running this county like a personal fiefdom for generations." "What happened to my father?" Reynolds leaned back, chair creaking beneath his weight. "Michael was stubborn as they come. Wouldn't let things lie. He kept pushing, gathering evidence, building a case against Sullivan. He hesitated, then pulled open a drawer in a sideboard and removed a small tin box. Inside lay a dog collar, leather cracked with age, still carrying the scent of animal and earth. A tarnished tag dangled from it, catching the morning light. Reynolds slid it across the table. Your father worked with a shepherd named Apollo. Both of them got too close to the truth. One night, they didn't come home on time. We found Michael barely alive on Oak Ridge Road. His car had gone over the embankment. Apollo was missing. Jackson's hand closed around the collar, feeling its weight, the history it carried. Sentinel moved closer, nose pressed to the old leather. Suddenly the dog barked, sharp and insistent, startling both men. His hackles rose, tail stiffening, as if recognizing something carried in scent alone. Reynolds leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Dogs remember what people try to forget. That smell never truly leaves. What happened to Apollo? His body turned up near the quarry 3 weeks later, made to look like he'd been hit by a car. But I saw the wounds. They weren't accidental. The implication hung in the air between them, heavier than the jacket on the table. Sergeant David Miles was your father's partner on the force. He started the investigation into Sullivan's land deals. He was warned, told to back down. Then he had his own accident. Car off the road during a storm, no skid marks. They called it weather conditions, but I examined the tires myself. They were cut. Reynolds' gaze dropped to Sentinel, who had pressed closer to Jackson, head against his knee. When Apollo died, I understood how far Sullivan would go. It wasn't just a message to your father. It was a warning to me. You quit, Jackson said softly, not an accusation, but simple fact. Reynolds nodded slowly, eyes distant with memory. I had a wife then, a son in high school. I couldn't risk them. When I saw what they did to Apollo, I understood what lines they were willing to cross. Reynolds leaned forward, voice dropping as if the walls themselves might be listening. If you're going to open this box, you better be ready for what comes out. They killed a dog to keep me in line. They won't think twice about you or him. He nodded towards Sentinel, who lifted his head, gaze steady, unflinching. What can you tell me about the stone house? It was a monitoring station. Sullivan had it built in the 70s, officially as a residence for his groundskeeper. But it sits at a junction of county roads, lets you see who's coming and going to half the properties he had his eye on. Your father discovered Sullivan was using it to store records of his dealings, figured no one would look in a property connected to Sullivan himself. But Sullivan still uses the attic, Jackson said. Recently. Reynolds nodded grimly. He wouldn't trust anyone else to keep an eye on that place. Too much evidence. After your father's accident, Sullivan claimed the property through a tax manipulation, then marked it abandoned in county records. But he kept it as his personal lookout. And now I bought it at auction, which means either someone made a clerical error or, Reynolds paused, studying Jackson's face, or someone wanted me to find it, Jackson finished. But who? And why now? Reynolds had no answer, but his eyes held a glimmer that might have been hope. The drive back to the stone house was tense, the knowledge Reynolds had shared settling like lead in Jackson's chest. Sentinel sat alert in the passenger seat, as if sensing his handler's darkening thoughts. Inside, Jackson spread the additional information Reynolds had provided across the kitchen table. The scale of corruption sprawled across decades, tentacles reaching into every aspect of local governance. The first warning came near midnight, the sudden absence of ambient sound. Sentinel's head jerked up, ears pivoting. Jackson extinguished his light immediately, listening. Metal scraped against metal somewhere outside. A vehicle door quietly closed. Jackson moved silently up the stairs, Sentinel flowing beside him like a shadow. At the top, he pressed against the wall beside a window, peering through a crack in the shutters. Moonlight revealed a dark figure moving across the yard, approaching the electrical meter on the side of the house. The trespasser worked quickly, tool glinting in the moonlight. Sabotage, not theft. When he finished, he stood back, surveying his work, then turned toward the house. The moonlight caught his face. Not Sullivan himself, but a younger man with the same heavy brow and set jaw. The mayor's son Jackson recognized from newspaper photos. County attorney, next in line for the family's power structure. When Jackson checked the electrical panel, the damage was evident. Wires had been cleanly cut, copper ends exposed. The message required no interpretation. We can isolate you completely. But the saboteur had left something else. Smears across the siding near the panel. Dark streaks that, when touched, revealed the whorls of fingerprints. They hadn't simply cut power. They had stood here long enough to leave their mark, a signature of intimidation. Jackson whispered to Sentinel, "We're being tested." The dog growled low, nose pressed to the earth, then swung back to face the trees beyond the yard. Nothing moved, but the silence of the forest felt weighted, expectant. Inside again, Jackson reinforced his security measures, using furniture to block vulnerable entrances. He lay awake for hours, Sentinel pressed against him, both listening to the silence that seemed more threatening than any noise. At the county clerk's office, Jackson requested access to property records for the stone house and surrounding parcels. The same woman who had processed his auction purchase now looked at him with undisguised anxiety. "Those records are sealed for digitization," she said, the lie transparent in her averted eyes. "Could take weeks to access." At the hardware store where Jackson sought materials to repair the cut power lines, the owner watched him warily, offering minimal assistance. When he tried to pay, his credit card was mysteriously declined. "System's down," the owner shrugged, though another customer completed a purchase without issue. The pattern continued at the diner on Main Street, where Jackson sought a hot meal after 2 days of camp food. The bell above the door chimed his entry, and Sentinel patted at his heel, leash loose. "We're not serving today," the owner stated flatly. Jackson controlled his expression, keeping his tone even. "The sign says open." The man's eyes dropped to Sentinel. "Dogs are not allowed in here." "He's a service animal. He's trained." The owner picked up a broom leaning against the wall, not swinging it but holding it like a barrier. He tapped the bristles against the tile near Sentinel's paws. The shepherd stiffened, ears flattening, but at Jackson's subtle hand signal held position. "You should leave," the owner said. His eyes held no personal anger, only the fear of something beyond Jackson. "Not worth the trouble." At the bank, the final phase of isolation awaited. Jackson inquired about setting up utilities for the stone house, needing to establish an account. The clerk, a young man in an ill-fitting suit, typed briefly on his computer, then frowned. "There's an issue with the property," he said, voice carefully neutral. "Shows a lien for unpaid administrative fees." "What fees? I just purchased it clean at county auction." The clerk adjusted his glasses, typing again. "Special processing and historical assessment, standard for properties of that age. 1,987.43. An invented debt, pulled from thin air." Jackson's jaw tightened as he read the printed notice the clerk slid across the counter. Due within 30 days, failure to pay would result in foreclosure proceedings. "You have 28 days, the clerk added unnecessarily, not meeting Jackson's eyes. Walking back to his truck, Jackson felt the weight of organized opposition pressing down. Sullivan's reach extended into every corner of Westfall County. The bank could fabricate debts, businesses could refuse service, utilities could be denied, all without a single direct threat. That night, Jackson reviewed everything he'd gathered, spreading documents across the kitchen table by lantern light. Each page told a story of theft disguised as procedure, of lives disrupted by bureaucratic manipulation. His thoughts turned to his father's letter. "If I cannot stand in court, let my son know the truth." Michael Foster had gathered evidence, built a case, prepared to fight through legal channels. And for that, he'd been run off the road, his partner killed as warning. As he considered his options, Sentinel suddenly stood, hackles rising. His nose worked furiously at the air, then he barked once and bolted toward the hallway, circling back toward the kitchen with increasing agitation. Jackson frowned, rising quickly. The dog stopped near the stove, nose pressed close to the gas line. He barked again, louder this time, tail rigid with alarm. Jackson crouched and smelled it too, the faint, sharp tang of natural gwen rising from the pilot area. He reached for the shutoff valve, twisting it closed, then threw open windows, the winter air rushing in like a cleansing tide. His chest tightened with the realization. This was no accident, no malfunction. The stove had been fine hours earlier. Someone had entered while they were in town, tampered with the gas line, and left a silent killer behind. Sentinel paced, barking again, then stopped squarely in front of Jackson, eyes blazing with an intelligence that transcended species. The message was clear. You were not meant to survive tonight. Jackson secured the shutoff valve with tape, sealing it against further tampering. For hours, he walked the perimeter, Sentinel beside him, searching for evidence of the intruder. Near the back fence, boot prints pressed into the thin layer of frost that had formed as the sun set. Fresh tracks where none should be. Back inside, Jackson barricaded the doors with furniture, his combat training asserting itself through muscle memory. He checked windows twice, set Sentinel's water within reach, and positioned himself against the wall, rifle across his knees. The dog lay close, chin resting on Jackson's boot, eyes never closing. "We're not leaving," Jackson whispered into the darkness, his voice steady despite the tension winding through him. "Whatever they do, we stay." Jackson needed an ally with reach beyond Westfall County, someone who couldn't be intimidated by local pressure. The name came to him as he shared breakfast with Sentinel, Emma Chen, an investigative reporter who had interviewed him after his second deployment. Her regional newspaper wasn't large, but she had connections to larger publications. Jackson remembered how she had followed up months after the initial interview, checking on the soldiers she had profiled. Integrity like that was rare, and exactly what he needed now. The drive to Emma's office took 2 hours, the distance itself a small protection from Sullivan's immediate reach. The newspaper operated from a narrow office above a hardware store, desks cluttered with papers, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights casting everyone in harsh relief. Emma hadn't changed much since he'd last seen her, still compact energy and direct gaze, hair pulled back severely, no makeup, clothes chosen for function rather than appearance. She recognized him immediately, eyes widening slightly as she spotted Sentinel at his side. "Jackson Foster," she said, rising from her desk. "Long time. And who's this?" "Sentinel," Jackson replied. "My partner." Her eyes softened as she looked at the shepherd, immediately understanding the implication of a service dog. "Afghanistan?" Jackson nodded once, not wanting to detour into his military history. "I need your help. It's about Westfall County. Mayor Sullivan." She tensed slightly, glancing around the office. "Let's talk somewhere else." At a coffee shop 3 blocks away, Jackson laid out the basics: the auction purchase, the hidden room, his father's connection, the escalating intimidation. He didn't show the documents yet, watching her reaction first, assessing whether she was someone he could trust with his father's legacy. Emma listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small, battered notebook. Sentinel lay at Jackson's feet, gaze fixed on her as if measuring her character. "Sullivan's reach is long," she said finally, voice low. "They buy ad space here, too. Small paper like ours can't afford to lose county legal notices, municipal advertising. People are losing their homes, their land," Jackson pressed, "and someone tried to kill me yesterday. This goes beyond real estate fraud." Emma leaned back, arms folded across her chest. "If I publish this, I'll lose my job." Jackson started to respond, but she continued, "But someone has to put it in print. I have contacts at the Denver Post who might listen, especially with solid documentation." She studied the shepherd, resting calmly under the table. "Your dog, was he military too?" Jackson nodded. 3 deployments, saved my unit twice by detecting IEDs, took shrapnel in his hip during our last tour. Emma's expression hardened. "And I'm guessing the VA support for his care mysteriously disappeared after discharge?" Jackson looked at her sharply. "How did you know?" "I've been hearing similar stories from other handlers. Service dog stipends cut, medical approvals denied. Been trying to trace the pattern." She tapped her pen against the notebook. "I think we might be looking at connected issues." They agreed to meet again that evening at a diner parking lot on the edge of Westfall County. Emma wanted to see the stone house, to photograph the hidden room and review the original documents. As she parked beside him, Sentinel suddenly stiffened, ears forward, lips curling in a low growl. Jackson turned to see headlights in his rear-view mirror, a black SUV idling at the entrance to the lot, too far for clear identification but close enough for surveillance. Emma noticed his change in posture. "What is it?" "We're being watched. Black SUV by the entrance." She reached for her bag, professional calm betrayed by the sudden tension in her movements. Jackson whistled softly to Sentinel, who remained focused on the threat, a growl rumbling in his chest. The SUV crept forward, positioning itself to block the lot's exit. Two men sat inside, faces indistinct through tinted windows. "Sullivan's people," Jackson said quietly. "They must have followed me from town." Emma's breath quickened. "I can't be seen with you." "Not yet. Not until I have enough to publish." Jackson started his truck, mind racing through options. The SUV had the exit covered, but the parking lot backed onto a service alley for deliveries. A tight squeeze, but possible. "Hold on," he told Emma. "Follow right behind me." He swung the truck hard to the left, accelerating toward the narrow alley. Sentinel barked once, sharp warning, as the SUV's engine roared to life, but the warning had bought them precious seconds. The SUV lunged forward but misjudged the angle, tires skidding on the light snow covering the pavement. They emerged onto a side street, Jackson immediately cutting his lights and turning right, then right again, doubling back through residential streets as the SUV struggled to find them in the growing storm. They pulled off near a bridge on the outskirts of town, engines off, waiting in silence. Emma's breath formed clouds in her cold car, her hands visibly shaking as the adrenaline peaked, then began to subside. "He saved us," she whispered, looking at Sentinel through Jackson's window. "He warned you before they could box us in." Jackson nodded, reaching over to scratch behind the shepherd's ears. "He always does." "We can't go to the stone house tonight," Jackson said. "They'll be watching it." Emma nodded, composure returning as her reporter's instincts kicked in. "Give me copies of what you have. I'll start research from my end, cross-reference with county databases, property records in neighboring jurisdictions." As they prepared to separate, Emma hesitated, then spoke with renewed determination. "This isn't just about land, is it? Your father, the hidden records, the escalation to attempted murder. Sullivan is protecting something bigger." "What do you mean?" "I've been tracking patterns in veteran benefit reductions across 3 counties. Service dog stipends, disability claims, medical approvals, all being cut or delayed, particularly for canine handlers." She gestured toward Sentinel. "Your dog's hip injury. The treatment was denied?" Jackson nodded, the memory still bitter. "Twice. They claimed insufficient documentation, then lost the appeal paperwork. I ended up paying for surgery myself." Emma's eyes narrowed. "I think there's a connection. I need to do more research, but if Sullivan is diverting veteran benefit funds somehow..." She left the implication hanging. The revelation settled like ice in Jackson's chest. If Sullivan's corruption extended to stealing from veterans, from service animals who had risked everything, that elevated the crime from local graft to something far more despicable. The drive back to the stone house was tense, each set of headlights a potential threat. The house appeared undisturbed, silent under its fresh white blanket, but appearances meant nothing. Inside, the cold had deepened in his absence, the stone walls radiating chill. Jackson checked the crawl space where he'd hidden the most crucial documents. They remained untouched. That night, sleep came in fragments, disrupted by every creak of the old house, every shift of wind. Sentinel stayed pressed against him, the dog's body warmth the only comfort in the frigid interior. Jackson's mind churned with Emma's theory about veteran benefits, making connections with fragments he'd seen in his father's files. If Sullivan was diverting federal funds meant for veterans, that opened avenues for prosecution beyond local jurisdiction. It might be the key to bringing him down through channels he couldn't control. After another attempt on his life, brake lines cut on his truck, only detected by chance, Jackson packs his bags to leave, believing the fight too dangerous. He set the bag near the front door, hand on the knob, the cold metal grounding him in what he told himself was a practical decision. If he left now, perhaps Sullivan would turn his attention elsewhere. The fight could belong to someone braver, someone with more resources, someone less alone. Jackson reached down to clip Sentinel's leash, preparing for their retreat. But the shepherd did not move. Instead, the dog sat squarely in front of the door, body blocking the threshold, eyes fixed on Jackson with an intensity that made words unnecessary. Jackson tugged gently on the leash. "Come on, boy. We need to go." Sentinel remained motionless, tail still, gaze locked on his handler's face. It was not defiance born of stubbornness, but of loyalty so absolute it transformed into refusal. Jackson felt frustration rise, then falter, replaced by something older and heavier. He saw in Sentinel's amber eyes a vow as clear as spoken words. If you leave without me. Jackson's breath caught, chest tightening in a way he hadn't felt since holding dying teammates in dust-filled air. He dropped the leash, hands trembling, and sank to his knees before the dog who had followed him through war and loss without hesitation. Sentinel immediately moved forward, pressing his head into Jackson's chest, his weight solid, his fur warm against skin gone cold with indecision. Jackson's arms wrapped around the shepherd almost without conscious thought, the duffel forgotten at his side. The sob that escaped him surprised even himself. Raw and quiet, a sound he had suppressed through battles and nightmares and the slow collapse of his marriage. He pressed his face into Sentinel's neck and whispered, "All right, we stay." For the first time since returning from his final deployment, Jackson allowed the tears to come. They fell not from fear, not for the threats that surrounded them, but for the sheer depth of being chosen by another life with such unyielding faith. After long minutes, he released his grip slightly. Sentinel stepped back, only far enough to look into Jackson's face, his ears forward, his expression solemn. Jackson ran a hand down the shepherd's scarred side, feeling the ridge of healed tissue that marked his partner's sacrifice. "We'll see this through," he said more firmly. "For all of them, for Apollo, for my father." Sentinel's tail moved once, a slow sweep across the floor, enough to acknowledge the promise. Jackson stood, wiped his face with his sleeve, and kicked the duffel aside. The bag slumped against the wall, its purpose ended. He gathered the files again, stacking them with renewed care, and placed them back on the table where they belonged. The night deepened outside, wind dragging against the shutters, but inside something had shifted. The cold remained, but it no longer reached Jackson's core. In the stillness, he thought again of his father's note, tucked in the hidden folder. "If I cannot stand in court, let my son know the truth." Tonight, the words no longer felt like a burden, but a charge passed forward through time, a duty accepted not out of obligation, but conviction. Jackson whispered into the quiet, not knowing if the house or his father's memory was meant to hear. "We will not run." Sentinel shifted closer, paw brushing Jackson's boot, sealing the vow with touch. The decision to stay transformed the stone house from a shelter to a battleground. Jackson Foster spent the early hours after dawn cataloging what they had. Supplies for a week, the generator with fuel for 3 days, his rifle with limited ammunition, and most critically, the evidence against Sullivan. He methodically photographed every document using his phone, uploading the images to an encrypted cloud service Emma had recommended. If something happened to the physical evidence, digital copies would survive. Sentinel prowled the perimeter, stopping occasionally to press his nose against window glass, monitoring the world beyond their walls. The shepherd's military training remained evident in his movements. Deliberate pauses at corners, head tilted to catch sounds before they became threats. Body always positioned between Jackson and potential danger. The first day passed in tense quiet. Jackson used the generator sparingly, just enough to charge his phone and heat one meal. Night fell early, winter shadows stretching across the bare yard. In darkness, the stone house felt both fortress and prison, protecting them while cutting them off from allies. Jackson's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Emma. Found in corporation papers for Sullivan Veterans Foundation. Board members include mayor, son, county treasurer. Federal grants received last year, $3.2 million. Documented aid to veterans, $430K, working on tracking missing funds. The numbers burned in Jackson's mind as he stared at the ceiling. Sentinel's warmth against his side, the only comfort in the frigid room. $3 million meant for veterans, men and women like himself, animals like Sentinel, siphoned away to enrich the Sullivans. The betrayal cut deeper than any personal threat. The missing money represented surgeries never performed, rehabilitation never provided, support never given to those who had sacrificed everything. Morning brought the sound of vehicles on the gravel road, 2 trucks moving slowly past the house, occupants clearly visible with binoculars trained on the windows, not hiding their surveillance now, but flaunting it. A message. We're watching. We know you're still here. We're waiting for you to break. Jackson contacted Reynolds using Emma's secure communication channel, asking about the Veterans Foundation and its operations in the county. The former sheriff's response came hours later. Started after I left office. Always seems strange. Lots of pearl, little visible help. We'll ask around discreetly. By midday, Jackson had mapped every approach to the house, identifying vulnerable points and setting simple alarms. Tin cans strung on fishing line, branches positioned to snap loudly if disturbed. Combat skills repurposed for civilian defense. Inadequate, but better than nothing. The afternoon brought unexpected hope. Emma had made contact with a reporter from the Denver Post, someone with experience investigating corruption cases and connections at the federal level. Not commitments yet, but interest. The story had potential to break beyond Sullivan's sphere of influence. As light faded, Jackson watched Sentinel suddenly stiffen, head turning sharply toward the kitchen. The dog moved with urgent purpose, stopping at the back door, hackles raised. Jackson followed, staying low, peering through the gap in the curtains. A shadow moved across the yard, hugging the tree line. Too small for an adult, moving too quickly for stealth. A child, a boy perhaps 10 or 11, darted between trees, stopping to glance over his shoulder before continuing toward the house. In his arms, he clutched something bulky. Jackson considered his options. Potential trap versus innocent in danger. Sentinel's posture provided the answer. Alert but not aggressive, ears forward with curiosity rather than threat assessment. Jackson cracked the door open. The boy froze, wide-eyed, then rushed forward, thrusting a grocery bag toward him. "My dad said to bring this. Said you might need it." The boy's voice cracked with nerves, eyes darting between Jackson and Sentinel. He said, "Don't tell anyone." Inside the bag, canned food, batteries, a prepaid phone with a note taped to it. "Safer than yours. Only call this number." A single contact programmed. Before Jackson could thank him, the boy was running back toward the trees, vanishing into gathering darkness. Sentinel watched him go, tail wagging slightly for the first time in days. That night, Jackson used the new phone to call the mysterious contact. A man answered immediately. "Took you long enough. Name's Miller. My boy delivered the package?" Miller, owner of the hardware store that had refused service days earlier, now offering aid in secret. His son had overheard Sullivan's men discussing taking care of the problem at the Stonehouse that weekend. Details were sparse, but the threat timeline had accelerated. "My family's lived here 4 generations. Sullivan foreclosed on my brother's farm 3 years ago. Some bullshit tax assessment nobody could appeal. Been watching them operate too long. Can't help openly, but you're not alone." The call gave Jackson what he needed most. Confirmation that the town's complicity was based on fear, not agreement. Beneath the surface of obedience, resentment simmered. If Emma could publish her story, if evidence reached federal investigators, others might find courage to stand. 2 more days passed with increasing pressure. The county sheriff posted a notice on Jackson's truck claiming parking violations, threatening impoundment. The bank sent another letter accelerating the payment deadline on the fabricated fees. Each move designed to force him out through bureaucratic means rather than direct confrontation. Emma's investigation progressed steadily. She discovered offshore accounts receiving regular transfers from the Sullivan Foundation, property purchased through shell companies, a network of financial manipulation stretching back 15 years. The veteran benefit fraud was just one component of a larger criminal enterprise. On the 5th day, Jackson received an unexpected call from Reynolds. The old sheriff's voice carried an urgent edge. "Need to meet, not over phone. Tonight, Carlson's Pond, midnight. Come alone." Instinct warned against leaving the house, against separating from Sentinel. But Reynolds had information too sensitive for electronic communication. Jackson secured the house as thoroughly as possible, placing the most critical documents in a waterproof container hidden beneath floorboards in the hidden room. "Stay," he told Sentinel, hating the command even as he gave it. "Guard." The shepherd watched him with reproachful eyes, understanding the words but sensing the wrongness of the separation. Jackson left through the back window, moving through woods rather than taking the driveway, his progress slow and deliberate in the moonless night. Carlson's Pond lay 2 miles south, a small reservoir used for irrigation during summer months, frozen now in winter stillness. No vehicles in the small parking area, no movement along the shoreline. Jackson approached cautiously, staying within tree cover, scanning for Reynolds or anyone else. A flashlight blinked twice from the small dock, extending into the ice. Reynolds' signal. Jackson moved forward, every sense heightened for ambush. The former sheriff stood alone, shoulders hunched against the cold, breath clouding around his face. "Thank you for coming." Reynolds' voice sounded strained, different from their previous meeting. "I've found something about your father's case." As Jackson stepped onto the dock, floodlights erupted from the trees surrounding the pond. Engines roared to life, trucks blocking the access road, men emerging with flashlights sweeping the area. Not Reynolds' voice at all, but a skilled imitation. The man on the dock straightened, turning to reveal a younger face than Reynolds. Sullivan's son, the county attorney, smiling with professional confidence. "Mr. Foster, thank you for accepting our invitation." His tone carried the practiced smoothness of courtroom victory. "We thought it was time for a direct conversation." Jackson assessed his situation with combat clarity, surrounded, outnumbered, no clear escape route across open ground. He'd been outmaneuvered, drawn into the open through the one weakness they had identified, his need for answers about his father. "Where's Reynolds?" Jackson kept his voice steady, showing neither fear nor anger. "Sheriff Reynolds is unavailable at the moment. He's safe, merely detained for his own protection. We were concerned about his involvement with your increasingly erratic behavior." The younger Sullivan gestured toward the parking area where several men stood watching. Not local thugs, but professionals. The calm stillness of men comfortable with violence, positioned strategically to control the space. "My father would like to resolve this situation quietly. You've accessed property and documents that don't belong to you, made accusations that could be considered defamatory, and trespassed on county land. However, we're prepared to be reasonable." He produced an envelope from his coat pocket. "Inside, you'll find a cashier's check for $20,000 and a one-way ticket to Seattle. In exchange, you vacate the stone house immediately, taking nothing but your personal belongings, and sign a confidentiality agreement regarding anything you may believe you've discovered." The bribe lay between them, illuminated by harsh floodlight. $20,000, enough to start over somewhere, enough to vanish from Sullivan's world. "And if I refuse?" The younger Sullivan's smile never wavered. "The county has significant evidence that you've been suffering psychological episodes since your military discharge. PTSD can manifest in paranoid delusions, conspiracy theories, irrational behavior. Your recent interactions in town have alarmed many citizens. The sheriff's department has grounds for an involuntary psychiatric evaluation. For your own safety, of course." The threat hung in the frigid air. Not violence, but something potentially more effective. Using the system against him. Using his military service and trauma as weapons to discredit anything he might say. "I need time to consider." Jackson kept his expression neutral, mind racing through options. "Of course. Take the envelope. You have until tomorrow evening to vacate the property. After that, we'll be forced to pursue less comfortable alternatives." The drive back to the stone house felt endless, the envelope on the passenger seat where Sentinel should have been. Jackson took a circuitous route, watching for tails, mind churning through the implications. Sullivan was escalating from harassment to direct action, offering carrot before resorting to stick. The timing suggested Emma's investigation was making them nervous. As Jackson approached the house through the woods, something felt wrong. Too quiet, no lights visible despite the generator he'd left running for heat. Sentinel should have barked at his approach. The dog's training included alert signals for returning handlers. Moving silently toward the back entrance, Jackson spotted the broken window, glass scattered across the snow, frame splintered. Inside, destruction greeted him. Furniture overturned, his few possessions scattered, the hidden door to the basement standing open. "Sentinel!" Jackson's voice echoed through empty rooms. No answering bark, no click of nails on hardwood. Just silence. In the hidden basement, file cabinets stood open, contents strewn across the floor. The most damning documents, those connecting Sullivan to the veteran fund fraud, were gone. Only the waterproof container remained untouched beneath the floorboards, overlooked in the hurried search. A note pinned to the desk with a hunting knife. The dog is safe. Cooperate, and he stays that way. Jackson's world contracted to a single point of rage and desperation. They had taken Sentinel, not just as leverage, but as punishment, knowing exactly what the dog meant to him. The same strategy used against his father and Apollo decades earlier, the pattern repeating with cruel precision. He called Emma immediately, voice tight with controlled fury. They took Sentinel, ransacked the house, stole most of the evidence. Emma's sharp intake of breath carried through the line. I'm so sorry, but I still have the copies you sent, and I've secured them off-site. The Denver Post is interested. They're assigning a senior investigative reporter to work with me. This doesn't end here. They're holding Reynolds too, using him as bait to draw me out. Where are you going now? Emin heard the determination in his tone. To get my dog back. Jackson knew attempting direct rescue would be suicide. Sullivan's men would expect that, would be prepared. Instead, he needed leverage of his own. The remaining evidence in the waterproof container included something he hadn't fully examined before. Detailed financial records from 2009 showing large transfers from Sullivan Foundation accounts to an entity called Blackwater Development. A quick search revealed Blackwater Development had purchased 3,000 acres of former farmland at the county's northern edge, land later rezoned for commercial use after mysterious fires destroyed several historical structures that might have prevented development. The timing aligned with Sullivan's initial involvement with the Veteran Benefit Program. The connection wasn't immediately clear until Jackson found a prospectus for potential investors. Blackwater planned to build a private prison on the site, with contracts already preliminarily approved by state officials. The project had stalled due to environmental concerns, but Sullivan had invested millions in preparation, money traced directly from the Veteran Fund. This was Sullivan's vulnerability, not just fraud, but specific proof of where the stolen money had gone, connecting him directly to both the theft and the intended beneficiary. Jackson photographed everything, then called Miller on the prepaid phone. I need a favor, something only a local would know. Jackson explained his need without revealing why. Where would Sullivan keep something valuable but hidden? Not his house or office, somewhere private, but secure. Miller didn't hesitate. The hunting lodge at Willow Creek. Families owned it for generations, keeps it off official records. Only Sullivan and his closest people ever go there. 5 miles north of town, accessible only by private road. Thank you. One more thing. If something happens to me, I've left information in a P.O. box in Harrisville. Keys taped under the third step on my porch. Make sure it reaches Emma Chen. Miller's voice turned solemn. Watch yourself. Those people don't play fair. The Willow Creek property appeared deserted when Jackson approached through dense forest shortly before dawn. A sprawling log structure surrounded by smaller outbuildings, generator humming quietly, a single light burning in what appeared to be a kitchen window. 2 vehicles parked outside, Sullivan's Range Rover and an unmarked black SUV, similar to the one that had followed them earlier. Jackson circled the property slowly, mapping security measures. Motion sensors on main approaches, cameras covering the driveway and main entrance. But the back facing the creek had minimal coverage. Overconfidence in remote location rather than comprehensive security. From the edge of the trees, he scanned windows with binoculars. Movement in one revealed Mayor Sullivan himself, pacing while speaking on a phone, gesturing emphatically. No sign of Sentinel or Reynolds, but a separate structure behind the main lodge showed signs of recent activity. Fresh footprints in the snow, from a small chimney. Jackson waited, gathering intelligence, formulating approach. Direct confrontation would fail. Sullivan surely had armed security. Instead, he needed evidence first, then leverage. As sunrise approached, activity increased. Men loading equipment into the SUV, Sullivan emerging briefly to issue instructions before returning inside. The men departed in the SUV, leaving Sullivan apparently alone at the property. Opportunity presenting itself through arrogance. The mayor clearly believed himself untouchable, requiring minimal protection at his private retreat. Jackson moved closer, staying within tree cover, watching as Sullivan returned to what appeared to be an office in the lodge's east wing. Through windows, Jackson could see him working at a computer, occasionally referring to documents spread across a large desk. The separate outbuilding remained Jackson's primary concern, most likely location for holding Sentinel and possibly Reynolds. He needed to verify before making any move. Approaching the structure required crossing 30 yards of open ground, visible from the main lodge if Sullivan happened to look out. Patience and timing. Jackson waited until Sullivan left the office, tracking his movement through windows as he went to another part of the lodge. Then Jackson moved, fast and low across the clearing, reaching the outbuilding's shadow without detection. The structure was a converted stable, solid construction with small windows set high in the walls. A padlock secured the main door, but a side entrance appeared to use a standard key lock. Jackson pressed his ear against the wood, holding his breath to listen. A soft whine came from inside. Familiar, unmistakable. Sentinel was there. Jackson examined the lock, simple tumbler mechanism he could pick with proper tools, which he hadn't brought. Improvisation required. He retrieved a thin wire from his jacket pocket, part of one of the alarm systems he'd set at the stone house, and fashioned a crude pick. It would take time, risk discovery, but no alternative presented itself. Minutes stretched as he worked the lock, hyper-aware of exposure, of Sullivan potentially spotting him from the main lodge. Finally, a click as tumblers aligned. Jackson eased the door open, slipping inside quickly. The interior was divided into stalls, most empty. In the farthest, Sentinel lay tethered to a support post, alert but unharmed. The shepherd's ears perked immediately, body tense but silent, military training suppressing the instinct to bark at his handler's appearance. In another stall, Reynolds sat with hands zip-tied to a metal pipe, a bruise darkening one side of his face. The former sheriff's eyes widened at Jackson's appearance. "They used my phone to lure you," Reynolds whispered, voice rough. "Voice imitation software. Grabbed me from my house yesterday morning." Jackson moved to Sentinel first, quickly releasing the restraints, checking for injuries. The dog pressed against him briefly, acknowledgement, reassurance, before assuming alert posture, ready for commands. Jackson then freed Reynolds, who rubbed circulation back into his wrists. "Sullivan's in the main house." "Why are you here?" Reynolds asked. "Getting you out, both of you." Jackson kept his voice low. "What did they tell you?" "Not much. Sullivan's son did the talking. Said I was interfering in county business, that they were containing a situation until it could be resolved properly. Mentioned psychiatric evaluation for you, talked about your PTSD making you unstable. The same threat they'd made to Jackson directly. We need to move now while Sullivan's alone. Back through the woods to where I left my truck." Reynolds shook his head. "Not without evidence. They've got everything from the stone house in Sullivan's office, all the files your father collected, everything you found. If we leave it, they'll destroy it all, claim you made everything up." The former sheriff was right. Escape without the evidence meant temporary safety, but ultimate defeat. Sullivan would bury the truth again, would continue stealing from veterans, would remain untouchable behind his wall of influence. "Stay with Sentinel. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, get to my truck and call Emma Chen." Jackson handed Reynolds the prepaid phone. "Sentinel will lead you through the woods. Voice command, find truck, will activate his training." Before Reynolds could protest, Jackson slipped out of the stable, assessing the main lodge again. Sullivan had returned to the office, visible through windows, sorting through documents. Jackson's documents, stolen from the stone house. The lodge's rear entrance appeared unalarmed, designed for convenience rather than security. Jackson approached cautiously, testing the door, unlocked. Inside, a mudroom led to a kitchen, then a hallway connecting to other parts of the structure. He moved silently, combat training guiding each step, listening for any sound beyond Sullivan's occasional movement in the distant office. The lodge's interior reflected wealth and hunting tradition. Mounted trophies, expensive furniture, a stone fireplace dominating the main room. Jackson skirted the open areas, staying close to walls, making his way toward the office where Sullivan worked. Through a crack in the not-quite-closed door, Jackson could see Sullivan at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, voice rising in irritation. "I don't care what the Post is asking about. Deny everything. We've contained the source, recovered the documents. Without evidence, it's just the ramblings of a disturbed veteran. Yes, the dog too. Insurance policy. Reynolds is becoming a problem. Too many old connections willing to listen to him." Sullivan hung up, returning his attention to the files spread across his desk. Land deeds, foundation records, financial statements, all the evidence of decades of corruption laid out for final review before destruction. Jackson weighed options. Direct confrontation would be risky. Sullivan likely armed, possibly others on the property he hadn't spotted, but allowing him to destroy the evidence meant losing everything. The decision came instantly when Sullivan reached for a metal wastebasket, dropping files into it, then removing a lighter from his desk drawer. He intended to burn it all, right there in his office. Jackson pushed the door open, stepping into the room. Sullivan froze, lighter halfway to the basket, eyes widening in shock. "That's not yours to destroy." Jackson kept his voice calm, hiding the rage beneath. Sullivan recovered quickly, professional smile replacing momentary surprise. "Mr. Foster, I was wondering when you'd show up. My son mentioned your unreasonable response to our generous offer." "Put the lighter down in." Jackson remained near the doorway, blocking the exit. Sullivan complied with exaggerated slowness. "You're making a serious mistake. Breaking and entering, threatening a public official, combined with your history of mental health issues, this won't end well for you. We both know what's in those files: veterans fund fraud, land manipulation, money laundering through Blackwater development, your private prison project." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Sullivan's face at the mention of Blackwater. He hadn't expected Jackson to know about that connection. Impressive research, completely circumstantial, of course, and easily explained. Sullivan leaned back, performatively casual. "But I'm curious, how did you find the stone house? The auction was supposed to be internal, county employees only. Someone helped you, guided you there." The question caught Jackson off guard. He had assumed random chance, desperation leading to unexpected discovery. Sullivan nodded at Jackson's silence. "Your father hid those records decades ago, thought he was being clever. We've been monitoring that property ever since, waiting for someone to try accessing them. Usually it's reporters or activists who somehow hear rumors. Never expected his son would stumble into it. Poetic, I suppose. You killed Apollo, ran my father off the road." Sullivan shrugged, neither confirming nor denying. Ancient history. Unfortunate accidents happen in rural counties. Roads are treacherous, especially in bad weather. And now you've taken Sentinel. Same pattern, different decade. Insurance policy. You military types form unhealthy attachments to your animals. Makes you predictable. Sullivan's voice hardened. "Where's my dog now, Mr. Foster? I assume you've already located our guest accommodations." "Safe, unlike Apollo." Sullivan's expression darkened momentarily before he regained composure. "Let me explain reality to you. You have no leverage here. Those files?" He gestured to the documents on his desk. "Inadmissible, obtained illegally from county property. Your claims about foundation fraud? The foundation undergoes regular audits, all showing proper fund distribution. Your accusations about Reynolds' detainment? His word against mine and several witnesses who will testify he came here voluntarily to discuss your concerning behavior." He leaned forward, confidence radiating from every gesture. "Meanwhile, I have your documented history of PTSD, statements from multiple townspeople about your erratic behavior, and authority to request emergency psychiatric evaluation. I also have connections at every level of county governance. You have, what, a reporter from a small-town paper? A disgraced former sheriff? A dog?" Jackson maintained eye contact, not responding to the provocation. Sullivan continued, warming to his monologue. "I'm still willing to be reasonable. Take the money, sign the papers, leave with your dog. Start fresh somewhere. The Sullivan name means nothing. My offer expires in 30 seconds. Jackson had anticipated this moment, had prepared his response during the long night watching the lodge. Not rage, not threats, but something Sullivan would understand. Leverage. "Before coming here, I sent everything I had on Blackwater development to Emma Chen. Financial records, the prospectus showing your investment, transfers from the Veterans Fund. If anything happens to me, Reynolds, or Sentinel, she publishes immediately. The Denver Post is already interested." For the first time, Sullivan's confident facade cracked slightly. Blackwater was his vulnerability. Too much money invested, too many promises made to powerful people, too many regulations circumvented through bribes and manipulation. "You're bluffing. We recovered everything from the stone house." Not everything. My father was more thorough than you realized. He kept duplicates elsewhere. Sullivan studied Jackson's face, searching for deception. Finding none, his expression hardened. What do you want? Reynolds and Sentinel walk out of here with me, along with all the files on that desk. You don't follow, don't interfere. In exchange, the Blackwater information stays private, for now. Sullivan weighed his options, calculation visible in his eyes. And the Veterans Fund investigation? Continues, that's non-negotiable. Too many people have been hurt. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock on the office wall. Sullivan finally nodded, gestured tight with suppressed fury. Take the files. Take your dog. This isn't over, Foster. You have no idea the forces you're challenging. I understand exactly who I'm challenging. A thief who steals from wounded veterans. A coward who kills dogs to frighten good men. Jackson began gathering the files, keeping Sullivan in his peripheral vision. My father knew what you were. Now everyone else will too. Sullivan's hand moved suddenly toward his desk drawer. Jackson tensed, preparing for a weapon, but the mayor simply removed a cell phone, tapping a number. Stand down, let them leave. His voice carried the bitterness of temporary defeat. We'll handle this differently. Outside, Jackson found Reynolds and Sentinel waiting at the edge of the trees, the former sheriff clearly anxious about the extended absence. The shepherd pressed against Jackson's leg briefly, silent acknowledgement of reunion, before resuming alert posture, leading their retreat through the woods. They moved quickly, following Sentinel's confident navigation, putting distance between themselves and the lodge before Sullivan could reconsider or summon reinforcements. Jackson's truck waited where he'd hidden it on a maintenance road, undisturbed. What happened in there? Reynolds asked as they drove away. Sentinel wedged between them on the bench seat. Temporary truce. He let us leave with the files in exchange for holding back some information about his private prison project. Won't last long, he'll be planning countermoves already. Reynolds examined the files Jackson had recovered, expression grim. He'll burn everything else, destroy any evidence we don't have copies of. That's why we're not going back to the stone house. Sullivan will have men waiting there. We're meeting Emma directly, somewhere public where they can't touch us. The rendezvous point was a 24-hour diner just across the county line, beyond Sullivan's immediate influence. Emma was already waiting, laptop open, accompanied by a man Jackson didn't recognize, older with the shrewd eyes of a career investigator. Jackson, this is Robert Mercer, senior investigative reporter for the Denver Post. Emma's voice carried equal measures of relief and urgency. I've been briefing him on everything we've gathered. Mercer extended his hand, grip firm. Ms. Chen's work is impressive. If half of what she's compiled is accurate, this goes beyond local corruption into federal jurisdiction. They commandeered a corner booth, spreading the recovered files across the table, Emma and Mercer rapidly sorting and photographing key documents. Reynolds provided context for older records, explaining connections between seemingly unrelated land deals and county decisions. The Veterans Fund fraud is our strongest angle, Mercer noted, examining financial statements. Federal grants misappropriated, clear paper trail despite attempts to obscure it. That gets us FBI involvement, takes it beyond Sullivan's reach. Emma nodded in agreement. The Blackwater connection strengthens everything. Shows intent, pattern, end goal of the scheme. While they worked, Jackson maintained watch, scanning each customer who entered, noting vehicles in the parking lot. Sentinel remained under the table, body pressed against his boots, equally vigilant in his own way. Sullivan will retaliate, Reynolds warned. He can't touch the evidence anymore, but he'll try discrediting the messengers. Especially you, Jackson. The PTSD angle, painting you as unstable. Let him try. Emma's voice carried steel beneath professional calm. We're publishing the first piece tomorrow, online initially, then print. Focuses on the Veterans Fund fraud, includes interviews with handlers who had benefits denied. Anonymous for now, but powerful testimony. Mercer nodded, adding, once it breaks, we coordinate with the Post's Washington Bureau to alert federal agencies. Treasury Department will be particularly interested in the money laundering aspects. The strategy was sound, but Jackson knew Sullivan would not surrender without deploying every weapon at his disposal. We need safe locations for everyone involved. Sullivan has resources, connections. He's already proven willing to use force. My editor has arranged temporary accommodations in Denver, Mercer offered. Security included. For all of you, including the dog. Reynolds shook his head. I'm not running. This is my county too, has been for generations. Sullivan doesn't get to drive me out. At least until the first story breaks, Emma urged. After that, public attention provides some protection. Right now, we're vulnerable. Their planning continued through early morning, strategy refined, contingencies established. As dawn approached, they separated, Emma and Mercer, to finalize the story for publication. Reynolds reluctantly agreeing to stay with a trusted friend outside county lines, Jackson and Sentinel to a motel Mercer had arranged under a false name. The motel room was basic but secure, single entrance, easily monitored, located on a busy highway where suspicious vehicles would be noticeable. Jackson allowed himself the luxury of a hot shower, the first in days, while Sentinel patrolled the small space, establishing perimeter in his methodical way. Later, stretched across the bed with Sentinel beside him, Jackson checked the encrypted messaging app where Emma would update their progress. A new message appeared. Story approved. Publishing online at noon tomorrow. Post's legal team vetted everything twice. We're solid. Tomorrow the truth would begin emerging. Sullivan's decades of corruption exposed to public scrutiny. Jackson felt neither triumph nor relief, only grim determination. Publishing was just the beginning. Sullivan would fight back with everything he had, would deploy lawyers and threats, would attempt to bury the story under denials and counter-accusations. The most dangerous period lay ahead, the time between exposure and justice, when Sullivan would be desperate, cornered, most likely to lash out with devastating force. Jackson had seen this pattern in combat. Wounded opponents are the most unpredictable, the most willing to employ scorched earth tactics. He scratched behind Sentinel's ears, the dog leaning into the touch with rare relaxation. Almost there, boy. Just a little longer. Morning brought new messages. Emma and Mercer working frantically to address last-minute legal concerns. Reynolds reporting suspicious vehicles near his friend's property, clear signs of surveillance. Sullivan mobilizing his resources faster than anticipated. By 10, Jackson had relocated to a different motel as a precaution, paying cash, using the false identification Mercer had provided. Sentinel seemed to understand the gravity of their situation, remaining vigilantly alert, responding instantly to the slightest unusual sound. At 11:45, Emma's message appeared. Going live in 15 minutes. Brace for reaction. Jackson refreshed the Denver Post website repeatedly until the headline appeared at exactly noon. Corruption exposed. County mayor diverted millions from veteran support funds. The story was comprehensive, devastating in its detail. Financial records showing the diversion of funds, testimony from veterans denied crucial benefits, evidence of offshore accounts receiving the stolen money, connections to the Blackwater Development Project. Emma and Mercer had assembled a prosecutorial case in journalistic form, backed by documents and first-hand accounts. What followed was tsunami rather than ripple. Within an hour, local television stations picked up the story. By mid-afternoon, national outlets began reporting. Sullivan issued a blanket denial through his office, claiming political motivation and promising legal action for defamation. Reynolds reported from his secure location, towns in uproar, sheriff's deputies showing up at homes of anyone quoted in the article. Sullivan called emergency closed-door meeting with county officials. Emma's updates came rapidly. Post's server crashed from traffic. Story republished on multiple platforms. FBI field office requested copies of all documentation. State Attorney General's office contacted our legal team. The momentum built through evening. A second article published focusing specifically on the targeting of service dog handlers, featuring Sentinel's story without naming Jackson directly. Social media erupted with outrage, veteran organizations issuing statements demanding investigation, politicians from both parties calling for accountability. Sullivan's counterattack began at dawn the following day, not through official channels but through targeted character assassination. Local news outlets suddenly received anonymous information about Jackson's military discharge, heavily edited to suggest psychological instability. Veterans Administration records mysteriously leaked showing PTSD diagnosis and treatment history. framed to undermine credibility. Emma called immediately. They're coming after you, just as Reynolds predicted, trying to paint you as unstable, unreliable witness. We need to get ahead of this. How? Direct interview, you and Sentinel on camera telling your story, military record, your father's investigation, Sullivan's threats, everything. Humanize what they're trying to weaponize. While the risk was substantial, exposing himself publicly would make him an even larger target, would forever connect his name to the case. But Emma was right. Sullivan's strategy relied on shadows, on twisting facts in darkness. Light was the only effective counter. Set it up. Today if possible. The interview took place that afternoon at the Denver Post's offices, security visibly present throughout the building. Mercer conducted it personally, his questions precise, allowing Jackson to explain the full arc of discovery, from the auction purchase to finding his father's records, from Sullivan's intimidation tactics to the kidnapping of Sentinel and Reynolds. Sentinel lay at Jackson's feet throughout, the camera occasionally panning to show the shepherd's scarred hip, visual evidence of military service and sacrifice. When asked about his PTSD, Jackson addressed it directly. Yes, I have PTSD from combat deployment. Thousands of veterans do. It doesn't make us unstable or unreliable. It makes us hypervigilant to threats, highly sensitive to injustice. Sullivan isn't just stealing money, he's stealing care from people who've already given everything for their country, including service dogs who saved lives in combat only to be abandoned when they needed help themselves. The interview aired that evening across multiple platforms, immediately shifting the narrative. Veterans groups mobilized in support, several handlers coming forward with similar stories of denied benefits, matching the pattern in Sullivan's county. By nightfall, news broke that federal agents had served warrants at Sullivan's office, the foundation headquarters, and his private residence. The mayor himself issued a statement claiming cooperation with authorities while maintaining innocence, his previously confident tone notably absent. Emma called with breaking news. They've frozen the foundation's accounts. State authorities have opened a separate investigation into the county's land transactions. Sullivan's son has resigned as county attorney, effective immediately. For the first time since discovering the hidden room, Jackson allowed himself to consider the possibility of actual justice. Not just exposure, but accountability. Sullivan's carefully constructed empire beginning to crumble under the weight of evidence and public attention. That night, in yet another temporary location arranged by Mercer's security team, Jackson sat reviewing the day's developments while Sentinel dozed beside him, finally relaxed enough for genuine rest. The shepherd's presence grounded him as it always had, through combat and its aftermath, through the investigation and its dangers. A message from Reynolds arrived near midnight. Sullivan's private jet filed flight plan for Cayman Islands. Sheriff's deputies stopped him at the airfield, federal hold order in place. Flight attempt, the classic move of the guilty when walls close in. Sullivan had finally miscalculated, revealing consciousness of guilt through attempted escape. The image of the powerful mayor being prevented from fleeing by the very law enforcement he had controlled for decades carried poetic justice. In the quiet that followed, Jackson allowed exhaustion to finally claim him, Sentinel's steady breathing beside him, the only sound in the anonymous motel room. Their fight wasn't over. Legal proceedings would take months, possibly years. Sullivan would deploy every resource, call in every favor, attempt every procedural delay. But the truth had escaped its stone prison, had found light after decades in darkness. His father's work, incomplete in one lifetime, continued through the next. The cycle of silence had been broken. As sleep approached, Jackson rested his hand on Sentinel's back, feeling the rise and fall of breath, the warmth of loyalty that had refused to let him walk away when fear threatened to overwhelm courage. In the shepherd's unfailing devotion, he had found strength to face what might have otherwise seemed insurmountable. "We did it, boy," he whispered into the darkness. "We kept our promise." Sentinel's tail thumped once against the bedspread. Acknowledgement, affirmation, the simplest expression of a bond that had withstood the worst humanity could offer and emerged unbroken on the other side. Dawn cast amber light across the Denver skyline as Jackson Foster stood at the hotel window, Sentinel alert beside him. 3 weeks had passed since Sullivan's attempted flight. since federal agents had descended on Westfall County with warrants and questions. The media storm had intensified, then stabilized into steady coverage. National outlets now referred to the Sullivan Veterans Fund scandal as shorthand, the story evolving from expose to ongoing investigation. Jackson's phone buzzed with a message from Emma. Grand jury convening today. Federal prosecutor wants to meet beforehand. My office, 9 a.m. The practical phase had begun. Testimonies, evidence processing, legal machinery grinding into motion. After the adrenaline of exposure came the methodical work of justice, less dramatic but equally essential. Sentinel nudged Jackson's hand, a gentle reminder of morning routine. Despite everything, the shepherd maintained military discipline, expecting regular exercise, training sessions, structured meals. His consistency had anchored Jackson through combat zones and now through legal battlegrounds. The Denver Post's offices hummed with activity when Jackson arrived, Emma guiding him to a conference room where Assistant U.S. Attorney Diana Patel waited. Files covered the table in organized stacks, two FBI agents positioned nearby. Mr. Foster, Patel stood extending her hand. Thank you for coming. We're building the most comprehensive case possible against Sullivan and his network. Your testimony will be central. Emma placed a protective hand on Jackson's shoulder. We've reviewed what they'll likely ask. Stick to direct observations, documented evidence. Sullivan's defense team will attack credibility, claim political motivation. Jackson nodded, tension drawn to a stack of photographs. The stone house, captured from various angles, forensic markers visible around the property. What happened there? Patel exchanged glances with the agents. After the warrants were executed, we conducted thorough searches of all Sullivan-connected properties. The stone house yielded additional evidence. Specifically, we found blood residue in a shallow grave near the northern perimeter. Preliminary DNA suggests canine origin, approximately 40 years old. Apollo, his father's partner, buried where Sullivan thought the evidence would remain hidden forever. Jackson felt Sentinel press against his leg, the shepherd sensing his handler's distress. We believe this strengthens the historical pattern of intimidation, Patel continued. Sullivan didn't just steal money, he systematically silenced anyone who threatened exposure. The grand jury proceedings lasted 3 days. Jackson testified for 6 hours, describing the hidden room, documents, escalating threats. Reynolds followed with corroborating testimony about Apollo, about the pressure to remain silent decades earlier. Emma presented the investigative timeline, meticulously documented from first contact through publication. Throughout, Sullivan's legal team, 5 high-priced attorneys from a Denver firm, observed from the gallery, faces revealing nothing, notepads filling with potential vulnerabilities to exploit later. On the 4th day, the grand jury delivered its decision, 37 indictments against Sullivan, his son, the county treasurer, and 4 foundation board members. Charges range from wire fraud to money laundering, from misappropriation of federal funds to conspiracy. A separate indictment included obstruction of justice and kidnapping related to Reynolds and Sentinel. Patel called Jackson personally with the news. Sullivan surrendered at his attorney's office an hour ago, no bail granted due to flight risk. His son is cooperating, providing additional evidence in exchange for reduced charges. The younger Sullivan's betrayal of his father marked a significant turning point. Family loyalty apparently extended only until federal prison became a personal reality. News channels broadcast footage of Sullivan being escorted into the federal courthouse, his customary confident smile replaced by tight-lipped silence. The man who had ruled Westfall County for decades now wore handcuffs instead of tailored suits, power stripped away in layers like bark from a dying tree. That evening, Reynolds called with unexpected information. Town's in chaos, council members resigning, deputies turning on each other. But something else, people are finding courage. 3 families contacted me today, bringing documents showing their land was taken through falsified tax liens. Same pattern as your father discovered, continuing right up until last year. The depth of Sullivan's corruption extended beyond even what they had documented. A generational enterprise of theft disguised as governance, of power accumulating through systematic exploitation. As federal proceedings moved forward, Jackson confronted a decision about his own future. The stone house remained in his name, his legal ownership confirmed through court records. The property that had nearly cost him everything now represented both painful history and potential purpose. Emma found him at the hotel one evening, staring at property records spread across the bed. Thinking of selling? After everything, nobody would blame you. Jackson shook his head, hand absently stroking Sentinel's fur. It was my father's choice to buy that house, to hide evidence there. He died because of what he knew, what he tried to expose. Selling feels like erasing that sacrifice. His relationship with Emim had evolved through shared danger into something neither had fully defined. Professional collaboration underlaid with mutual respect and growing personal connection. She sat beside him, careful not to disturb Sentinel's position. The foundation money, once the court releases the assets, there's talk of establishing a restitution fund for veterans who were denied benefits. They'll need someone to oversee it, someone who understands both the fraud and the legitimate needs. The possibility hung in the air, purpose emerging from wreckage, meaning constructed from injustice. Jackson had not considered what would come after Sullivan's prosecution, had focused solely on exposure and justice without planning for aftermath. 2 days later, Patel requested an urgent meeting. Jackson found her in the federal building, expression grave, an unfamiliar file open on her desk. "We've uncovered additional evidence regarding your father's accident." She hesitated, measuring her words. Phone records from that period show multiple calls between Sullivan and the county coroner immediately afterward. "We've also located a witness, a former deputy who was first on scene, but whose statement was never included in official reports. The deputy's account described finding Michael Foster's car with obvious signs of tampering, brake lines cleanly cut, not broken from impact. His report had been ordered modified by the sheriff, Sullivan's cousin, details altered to support the accident narrative. We're amending charges to include conspiracy to commit murder," Patel explained. "The statute of limitations doesn't apply since this connects to the ongoing criminal enterprise." Justice for his father, the possibility Jackson had never truly believed would materialize. The revelation should have brought comfort, closure. Instead, it reopened wounds he had carefully managed for decades, forced confrontation with grief long compartmentalized. That night, alone in the hotel room, the weight of it finally broke through his careful control. Jackson wept for the first time since childhood, since the funeral where adults spoke in hushed tones about tragic accidents while avoiding his questions. Sentinel pressed against him, offering silent comfort, absorbing the storm of emotions no longer containable. Mourning brought renewed resolve rather than lingering grief. Jackson contacted Reynolds, requesting his presence at the stone house. If they were truly to reclaim what Sullivan had stolen, not just money but truth itself, they needed to begin where it all started. The property appeared different in early summer light. Less foreboding, more revealing. Without winter's stark shadows, details emerged, the craftsmanship of the stonework, the strategic positioning overlooking key roads, the natural beauty of the surrounding landscape. Reynolds arrived with unexpected company, Miller from the hardware store and his son, who had brought supplies during the siege. They carried tools, lumber, determination written across their faces. "Figured you might want to fix this place up proper," Miller explained. "Town's changing. Sullivan's gone, but what he built remains. Fear, suspicion, divisions. People need something new to believe in." They began with practical repairs, securing windows, patching the roof, clearing debris from the yard. Physical labor providing framework for deeper reconstruction. As they worked, more vehicles arrived. A plumber Sullivan had once bankrupted through false claims, a former teacher who had lost her position after questioning county financial reports, families whose land had been taken through manipulated assessments. Each brought tools, food, stories. Each had suffered under Sullivan's reign, had maintained silent resentment while lacking power to challenge the established order. Now, with that order crumbling, they emerged like seedlings after forest fire, tentative but determined to reclaim what had been scorched. By late afternoon, the gathering had transformed from renovation project to impromptu community meeting. Jackson found himself listening more than speaking as people shared experiences. Land suddenly rezoned after refusing to sell, tax assessments doubling overnight without explanation, building permits denied for arbitrary reasons, benefits vanishing when most needed. Miller articulated what many felt. Sullivan didn't just steal money or land, he stole trust in government, in neighbors, in the possibility of fairness. Rebuilding that will take longer than fixing this house. The observation crystallized something Jackson had been struggling to define. The true scope of damage extended beyond financial fraud into the community's psychological foundation. Sullivan's greatest crime was not theft, but the systematic destruction of civic faith, the deliberate cultivation of helplessness. As sunset approached, Reynolds pulled Jackson aside, voice lowered for privacy. "There's something you should know." When they searched Sullivan's hunting lodge, they found a safe behind a false wall. Inside was a journal, handwritten records going back to the 1970s. Names, properties, amounts. Sullivan documented everything, probably as insurance against betrayal by associates. "My father's name?" Reynolds nodded grimly. Entry from October 1983. Just 3 words. Foster problem eliminated. 2 weeks before the accident. Written confirmation of what they had already proven through other evidence. Yet the clinical brutality of those 3 words struck Jackson with physical force. Sullivan had not merely permitted or arranged his father's death. He had recorded it as a business transaction, a problem solved through elimination. That night, after everyone departed, Jackson and Sentinel remained at the stone house, sleeping bags rolled out in the living room, just as on their first night. The building felt different now, less haunted by secrets, more weighted with responsibility. Community expectations had been placed upon him, hope invested in what the property might become. Dawn found Jackson exploring areas of the house he had previously ignored during the frantic search for evidence. Behind the kitchen, a sunroom offered views across rolling hills, glass clouded by years of neglect, but structure sound. The attic, once Sullivan's surveillance post, revealed high ceilings and potential for conversion. The hidden basement, stripped of file cabinets, showed surprising size and solidity. The property contained both dark history and unexplored potential, much like Westfall County itself. Jackson began sketching ideas, thinking aloud to Sentinel, who followed with attentive patience. A resource center for veterans, perhaps. A hub for community legal assistance. A training facility for service dogs. The possibilities expanded with consideration. Limitations imposed only by practical constraints rather than imagination. Emma arrived mid-morning, carrying news along with coffee. Sullivan's preliminary hearing is scheduled for next month. His attorneys are already floating potential defenses: diminished capacity, political persecution, selective prosecution. Standard tactics when evidence is overwhelming. And they walked the property together, Jackson sharing the community gathering from the previous day, the emerging vision for transformation. Emma listened with journalist's attention to detail, occasionally adding suggestions or raising practical questions. "You're really considering staying," she observed as they reached the edge of the property where force began. "Not just through the trial, but permanently." Jackson watched Sentinel exploring ahead, the shepherd's movements displaying none of the hypervigilance that had characterized him during the investigation. "There's work here that matters. Not just finishing what my father started, but building something new from what was broken." Emma's expression softened with understanding. Their relationship had developed within crisis, defined by shared purpose under threat. The possibility of connection beyond immediate danger remained unexplored territory, compelling but uncertain. "The Post has offered me a permanent position on their investigative team," she revealed. "Based in Denver, but with flexibility for fieldwork. They were impressed with how we handled the Sullivan story." The geographical implications hung between them. Denver, an hour from Westfall County. Close enough for regular contact, far enough to maintain professional independence. Neither acknowledged the personal dimension directly, but understanding passed between them nonetheless. Later that day, Jackson received an unexpected call from Patel. Sullivan's son provided information about additional documentation his father kept at a storage facility in Wyoming, registered under a shell company. Federal agents executed a search warrant this morning. The constant expansion of evidence against Sullivan suggested a man who documented his crimes meticulously, perhaps from pride in his own cleverness, perhaps as leverage against associates. His compulsion to record wrongdoing now fueled the case against him, history documented by its perpetrator. "They found something else," Patel continued, hesitation evident in her tone. A voice recorder and photographs in a waterproof container. The recording appears to be your father made shortly before his death. I wanted to prepare you before it's processed into evidence. Jackson's breath caught, mind racing through implications. His father's voice, preserved for decades, potentially explaining what he had discovered, what had led to his death. A message from beyond time, father to son, completing the circuit of truth. How soon can I hear it? Tomorrow morning. My office. The recording is being authenticated, but preliminary analysis confirms it's genuine. That night became the longest of Jackson's life, each minute stretched by anticipation and anxiety. He paced the stone house, Sentinel watching with patient concern until exhaustion finally claimed him near dawn. The federal building's technology lab felt sterile and impersonal for such an intensely personal moment. Jackson sat before specialized audio equipment, Patel and a forensic technician nearby, as the recording began to play. Static crackled, then cleared. A voice, hesitant at first, then gaining strength, emerged across decades. This is Michael Foster, Westfall County Sheriff's Department. Date is October 12, 1983. If you're listening to this, I'm probably dead. The voice carried familiar cadences Jackson recognized from childhood memories, from the few recordings his mother had preserved. His father continued, detailing discoveries about Sullivan's early land manipulation schemes, connections to county officials, threats received as his investigation progressed. Sullivan approached me last week, offered money to lose the evidence I've gathered. When I refused, the threats escalated. My partner Apollo was poisoned 2 days ago, survived, but barely. The message was clear. The recording detailed evidence locations, connections between seemingly unrelated county transactions, names of potential witnesses, too frightened to come forward publicly. Michael Foster had been methodical in his documentation, thorough in his investigation, aware of the growing danger yet unwilling to abandon the truth. If something happens to me, there's a safe deposit box at First National with copies of everything. Key is with David Miles. In the Stone House, I bought it through a shell company because Sullivan uses it to store records of his dealings. The irony appealed to me, hiding evidence of his crimes in his own repository. Then the recording's tone shifted, became more personal. Jack, if you're the one hearing this someday, I'm sorry for the burden this might place on you. Know that whatever happened, I believe some principles matter more than personal safety. The truth matters. Justice matters. Standing against corruption matters, even when it's dangerous, especially when it's dangerous. Jackson sat motionless as his father's final recorded words played. I hope you never need this message. I hope I'm there to watch you grow up, to teach you these things directly. But if not, know that I loved you more than anything. That whatever happened, it was worth fighting for a county where good people could live without fear, where truth mattered more than power. The recording ended, leaving silence weighted with history and emotion. Jackson became aware of moisture on his cheeks, of Sentinel pressing against his leg in response to distress. Patel and the technician had discreetly stepped away, giving him privacy to absorb this connection across time. His father had known the risks, had made contingency plans, had left breadcrumbs for future discovery, had specifically mentioned the Stone House as strategic acquisition rather than random chance. The property's significance expanded beyond mere evidence repository to deliberate chess move in a game extending beyond a single lifetime. Later that day, Reynolds met Jackson at a small park outside the federal building, the former sheriff's expression revealing he too had heard the recording. They sat in silence before Reynolds finally spoke. Your father was the best man I ever worked with, straight as they come, even when it cost him. I always wondered if he knew how dangerous Sullivan truly was, if he understood what he was risking. He knew, Jackson confirmed. Made the choice anyway. Reynolds nodded slowly. Some battles choose you. You don't get to walk away just because they're dangerous. The words echoed Jackson's own experience. The moment Sentinel had blocked the door, refusing to allow a retreat from responsibility. Some principles transcend self-preservation. Some truths demand acknowledgement regardless of personal cost. 3 days later, unexpected news arrived through Patel. Sullivan wants to deal. His attorneys have approached with an offer: full cooperation, testimony against remaining conspirators, complete financial disclosure of hidden assets. In exchange, reduced sentencing recommendations. The prosecution team requested Jackson's input before responding. Sullivan's cooperation would strengthen cases against associates, would reveal the full extent of corruption, would potentially recover millions in stolen funds. Yet it also meant the man responsible for his father's death might receive less than maximum punishment. The decision weighed heavily as Jackson walked the Stonehouse property with Sentinel, considering justice versus practical outcomes. His father's recording had demonstrated commitment to systemic change over personal vengeance. The greatest victory would not be Sullivan's suffering, but the complete dismantling of his corrupt system, the recovery of what had been stolen from the community and veterans. Jackson provided his reluctant approval for negotiations, with specific conditions: full restitution to veteran programs, complete disclosure of all land illegally obtained, cooperation in identifying every official who had facilitated the schemes. Punishment mattered less than repair, than rebuilding what had been broken. 2 weeks later, Sullivan appeared in federal court, diminished by detention and abandonment. His designer suits replaced by standard-issue clothing, his commanding presence reduced to hunched shoulders and averted gaze. He formally entered guilty pleas to 12 counts, the remainder dismissed under the agreement, and provided 4 hours of detailed testimony implicating former associates. Jackson attended, Sentinel at his side under special permission as service animal. Sullivan never acknowledged their presence directly, but his eyes flickered toward them once while describing the elimination of obstacles to his business interests in the 1980s. No remorse showed in his expression, only calculation and self-preservation. The following day, Jackson received an unusual message from Patel. Evidence team discovered something at storage facility you should see. Not directly case-related, but personally significant. At her office, she presented a cardboard box recovered from Sullivan's Wyoming storage unit. This was misfiled initially, separated from other evidence. Forensics just processed it yesterday. Inside lay items belonging to Apollo: service records, training certificates, medals from departmental competitions. Sullivan had kept trophies of his victory, mementos of the partner he had eliminated to silence Michael Foster. Among the items, a leather-bound notebook contained handwritten entries, training logs in Michael Foster's handwriting, daily records of Apollo's progress, observations about their developing partnership. The final entry, dated 3 days before the accident, read, "A's instincts saved us today. Detected someone following our vehicle, allowed evasive action. This partnership goes beyond handler canine, true connection transcending species. Whatever comes next, facing it together makes all the difference." Jackson carefully removed the notebook, the most personal item in the collection. "May I keep this? It's not evidence of crimes, just my father's private thoughts." Patel nodded understanding. "Officially, I'll document it as released to next of kin. Some things belong to family, not case files." That evening, Jackson read the entire notebook, absorbing his father's voice through written words after hearing recorded ones. The entries revealed not just a professional partnership, but a relationship mirroring his own with Sentinel. Mutual trust developed through shared purpose and daily commitment. History repeated across generations. Father and son both finding essential alliance with shepherds, both standing against corruption that threatened community foundations, both discovering that loyalty sometimes came with 4 legs and unflinching courage. The following week brought practical progress amid legal proceedings. Jackson formally established the Foster Veterans Resource Center, using the Stonehouse as headquarters. Initial funding came from his own military pension and savings, with grant applications pending for sustainable operations. The community response exceeded expectations. Veterans from 3 counties volunteered renovation assistance. A retired VA counselor offered weekly therapy sessions. A local veterinarian established regular clinics for service animals. The spaces that had once hidden Sullivan's corruption now housed its antithesis: transparency, support, genuine service. Reynolds became unofficial historian, documenting Sullivan's decades of manipulation while helping current victims navigate restitution processes. His knowledge of county operations proved invaluable in untangling complex land fraud cases, in identifying properties that should be returned to original owners. Emma divided time between Denver and Westphal County, her professional reporting maintaining crucial public attention on the case while subsequent investigations expanded. Her personal connection with Jackson deepened through shared purpose and growing understanding, neither rushing definition nor denying significance. The Foster Center's first major achievement came through partnership with federal prosecutors, a specialized program helping veterans review denied benefit claims, particularly those involving service dogs. The initiative identified hundreds of cases matching Sullivan's fraud pattern, extending far beyond county borders. Sentinel assumed unexpected role as ambassador, his calm presence helping veterans with PTSD feel comfortable at the center. His interaction with other service dogs became model for training program Jackson developed with professional handlers, focusing specifically on post-deployment transition support. 6 months after Sullivan's arrest, as autumn painted the hillsides surrounding the stone house, Jackson received notification that the former mayor's sentencing hearing had been scheduled. Despite the plea agreement, the judge would have significant discretion regarding incarceration terms and conditions. The prosecution team requested Jackson provide victim impact statement, both written and verbal, expressing how Sullivan's crimes had affected his family specifically and veterans generally. The responsibility weighed heavily, finding words adequate to decades of injustice, to lives permanently altered by systematic corruption. For 3 days, Jackson worked on the statement, discarding draft after draft as inadequate or excessive. The challenge lay in balancing personal loss with broader impact, in acknowledging pain without allowing it to overshadow purpose. The courtroom was packed for sentencing, national media present alongside local citizens. Sullivan sat with his attorneys, posture defeated, yet still somehow defiant. His cooperation had been transactional rather than remorseful, his testimony calculated rather than honest. When Jackson took the stand, Sentinel accompanying him to the witness box, the courtroom fell silent. He placed his father's notebook and Apollo's collar on the small ledge before him, tangible connections to what had been lost. Victor Sullivan didn't just steal money, Jackson began, voice steady despite the emotion beneath. He stole trust in governance, faith in community, belief in fairness. He turned public service into private enrichment, transformed civic duty into criminal enterprise. He broke the fundamental contract between citizens and leadership. Jackson detailed specific impacts: veterans denied crucial medical care, service dogs without needed treatment, families forced from generational homes, community divisions deliberately cultivated to prevent unified resistance. My father discovered Sullivan's corruption 40 years ago. For that discovery, his partner Apollo was killed as warning. Then my father himself eliminated when he refused to be silenced. Sullivan stole decades I should have had with my father. Wisdom that should have been passed directly rather than through hidden recordings and secret files. He lifted Apollo's collar. This belonged to a service animal who saved lives, who protected his partner, who embodied the loyalty Sullivan could never understand. Sullivan saw such devotion as weakness to exploit rather than strength to respect. That fundamental misunderstanding defined his entire career. The belief that power comes from control rather than service. The courtroom remained absolutely silent as Jackson concluded. The greatest punishment for Victor Sullivan isn't prison time, though that's necessary. It's witnessing the community he tried to own rebuilding without him, correcting his corruption, healing the divisions he cultivated. It's knowing that his legacy is being systematically erased, while my father's vision for this county is finally being realized. Justice isn't just punishment for wrongdoing. It's restoration of what was damaged, rebirth of what was destroyed. The judge sentenced Sullivan to 15 years in federal prison, significant though reduced from maximum potential under the plea agreement. More important were additional provisions: forfeiture of all assets derived from criminal activity, restitution payments to identified victims, permanent ban from public office, or financial industry participation. Outside the courthouse, Jackson faced assembled media with Reynolds and Emma flanking him, Sentinel steady at his side. Questions focused on whether the sentence seemed adequate, whether Sullivan had finally been held accountable after decades of impunity. The sentence matters less than the exposure, Jackson responded. Sullivan's greatest weapon was always secrecy, the ability to operate without scrutiny, to intimidate without consequence. That weapon is permanently destroyed. His name now means corruption rather than power. That transformation is the real victory. As cameras flashed and reporters called follow-up questions, a woman approached from the courthouse steps, elderly, walking with determination despite physical frailty. Jackson recognized her from community meetings at the Foster Center. Margaret Wilson, whose farm had been taken through fraudulent tax assessment 15 years earlier. She stopped before Jackson, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your father would be so proud of you. He tried to help my husband fight the assessment back then. Came to our house after hours, explained what Sullivan was doing. Nothing came of it. Sullivan had too much control then, but he tried when no one else would." The simple testimony carried more weight than the entire sentencing hearing, connecting past efforts to present achievements, confirming that Michael Foster's stand had not been entirely alone or forgotten. That evening, community members gathered spontaneously at the Stone House, bringing food and drinks, creating impromptu celebration of conclusion rather than beginning. The property had transformed over months of collective effort, gardens planted where weeds had grown, windows repaired and gleaming, interior spaces renovated for practical service. Miller raised a toast as sunset painted the stone walls gold. To the Fosters, father and son, who refused to accept corruption as inevitable or power as unchangeable. And to all of us who finally found courage to stand with them. The gathering continued into evening, conversation flowing more freely than would have been possible under Sullivan's shadow. People discussed county elections scheduled for spring, speculated about qualified candidates committed to transparency, debated policy priorities for rebuilding community trust. Near midnight, as the gathering dispersed, Emma found Jackson sitting alone on the porch steps, Sentinel dozing beside him. The air carried autumn crispness, stars brilliant above the hills surrounding the property. "Thinking about your father?" She settled beside him, shoulder brushing his. Jackson nodded, fingers absently stroking Sentinel's fur. "Wondering if he somehow knew this would happen eventually. If he bought this house not just to hide evidence, but to create this possibility. A place where truth could finally emerge, where community could rebuild." "Some battles extend beyond single lifetimes," Emma observed. "Your father started something he couldn't finish alone. You continued what you couldn't have started alone. That's how lasting change happens. Connection across time, purpose beyond individual capability." The observation captured something essential about their journey from auction purchase to justice. No single person had exposed Sullivan's corruption. It required Jackson's discovery, Reynolds' knowledge, Emma's journalism, Mercer's platform, Patel's prosecution, community members finding collective courage. And at crucial moments, it had required Sentinel, the shepherd's loyalty preventing retreat when fear threatened to overwhelm resolve, his protective instincts guiding them through physical and emotional minefields. As if sensing his thoughts, Sentinel stirred, lifting his head to rest on Jackson's knee, eyes reflecting starlight. The depth of understanding between them transcended ordinary companionship, forged through shared danger and purpose into something approaching spiritual connection. "What happens now?" Emma's question addressed more than legal proceedings or center operations. Jackson considered the multiple dimensions of her query: professional collaboration evolving beyond immediate crisis, personal connection deepening through shared purpose, individual healing advancing through community restoration. "We keep building what Sullivan tried to destroy: trust, community, possibility." Jackson's hand found hers in the darkness. "Some things need time to develop properly, need solid foundation rather than hasty construction." Emma's fingers interlaced with his, acceptance of unspoken proposal to explore connection gradually, mindfully. Foundations matter. Like this house, stone by stone, built to last generations. The following morning, Jackson woke early, Sentinel already alert and waiting by the bedroom door. Their morning routine had expanded since establishing the center, walking the property perimeter, checking facilities before daily operations began, preparing for scheduled visitors and programs. Veterans would arrive by 10 for weekly support group, several bringing service dogs for complimentary health checks by the volunteer veterinarian. Afternoon would bring legal advisors helping families navigate restitution claims for land improperly taken. Evening would feature planning meeting for expanding programs into neighboring counties where Sullivan's influence had reached. Purpose had replaced pursuit, building supplanted hunting. The initial desperate search for justice had transformed into methodical construction of systems preventing future corruption, supporting those previously victimized, establishing sustainable change. As Jackson prepared coffee in the kitchen, once designated for surveillance, he noticed movement in the driveway, a truck he didn't recognize approaching slowly. Sentinel noticed simultaneously, moving to the window with professional interest rather than alarm. The vehicle stopped near the porch, a young woman emerging with a German shepherd wearing service vest. The dog moved with slight awkwardness, favoring one leg, yet maintained alert posture beside its handler. The woman approached hesitantly, clearly unsure of her welcome despite the center's public invitation. Jackson opened the door before she could knock, Sentinel at his side. "Good morning. Can I help you?" She straightened, military-bearing evident despite civilian clothes. "Are you Jackson Foster? I was told you might help with Max's wife's situation. He was denied VA coverage for surgery on his hip. Shrapnel from our last deployment. Same pattern others have described." The request represented exactly why the center existed, why the Stonehouse had been transformed from evidence repository to community resource. Jackson stepped aside, welcoming them into the space once used to document corruption, now dedicated to correcting its consequences. "Come in. We have resources specifically for handlers and service dogs. Max looks like he's earned proper care." The woman's tension visibly eased as she entered, as Max exchanged proper greeting with Sentinel. Jackson led them toward the kitchen where coffee waited, explaining available assistance, connecting immediate need with broader mission. As sunlight strengthened across the valley visible through windows once shuttered against truth, Jackson felt momentary connection across time, his father's vision finally manifesting through chains of events neither could have fully anticipated. The stone house, built to last generations, now served purpose worthy of its strength, sheltering truth rather than hiding it, building community rather than enabling its exploitation. Sentinel settled beside the visiting shepherd, the older dog positioning himself to support the younger's injured side, sharing weight through subtle lean. The simple action embodied everything the foster center represented: strength supporting vulnerability, experience aiding recovery, connection transcending circumstance. Outside, more vehicles approached as the day's activities prepared to commence. Inside, healing began again, stone by stone, story by story, truth by truth, building future from reclaimed past.